The Atchafalaya Basin doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about your boat, your family waiting at home, or the single bar of cell service you lost somewhere between Bro Bridge and the channel markers that someone painted backward as a joke, or maybe as a warning. The air out here sits on your shoulders like a wet wool coat. It's 91 degrees before the sun clears the cypress canopy, and the humidity turns every breath into something you have to chew. Bullfrogs count off the seconds. Herons stand like pale grey saints at the edge of the shallows. And beneath it all, beneath the green skin of the water, something old has always been listening. The locals around Bayou Swamp have a saying, "Don't trust what knocks but never shows." They say it to the children first, then later they say it quietly to their grown children too. Marcus Thibodeau had been fishing these waters since he could hold a rod. 38 years old, built like someone had assembled him from leftover dockwood, he ran a small solo charter out of a flat-bottomed aluminum john boat. Nothing fancy, nothing memorable. On the third Saturday of October, he set out alone before dawn with 4 dozen live crawfish, a cooler of abita, and a plan to reach a honey hole 3 miles into the interior that his father had shown him, and his father's father before that. He told his wife he'd be back by noon. She'd laughed and said, "You always say noon." He kissed her on the forehead and pushed off into the dark. By 8 in the morning, he was anchored in the still water beneath a stand of bald cypress, their knees rising from the shallows like the knuckles of a buried hand. No signal on his phone, not even a ghost of one. The nearest road was 4 miles east. The nearest house was further than that. He cracked his first abita at 8:15, which is perfectly acceptable when you are alone in a swamp and the bass are cooperating, which they were. It was, he would say later, a perfect morning. At 9:42, according to the timestamp on a photo he'd taken of a largemouth, something knocked on the hull of the boat. Not a fish bump, not a submerged log drifting with the current. This was deliberate. 3 sharp raps in succession, the kind a knuckle makes on a door. Marcus looked over the starboard side. The water was dark brown, tannic, impenetrable below 6 inches. He saw nothing. No ripple moving away, no disturbance in the duckweed. A kingfisher landed on a branch above him, regarded him with one tilted eye, and flew off. He picked up his rod and told himself it was a big gar bumping for position. Gar knock. Everybody knows gar knock. He told himself this clearly and firmly, the way a man tells himself things he doesn't quite believe. 11 minutes later, it knocked again. This time, 7 raps, patient and evenly spaced, moving from the stern to the bow in a slow arc, as though something beneath him was walking the length of the hull and marking its progress. Marcus set down his rod, looked at both sides of the boat, and saw nothing, then leaned over the bow and peered down. The water gave him nothing but his own pale face looking back. Then he noticed the anchor rope. It was taut and vibrating as if something below had gripped it and was applying slow, steady upward pressure, not trying to move the boat, just letting him know it was there, testing, feeling the weight of the thing above it. Marcus reached for the anchor line, then pulled his hand back. He started the motor on the second pull, which was the first good luck he'd had in the last 11 minutes. He put the boat in reverse and the anchor line went rigid, then snapped sideways, yanking the cleat so hard the entire bow lurched to starboard. The anchor had caught on something that was moving fast toward the boat. Marcus gave the motor full throttle. The john boat bucked and fishtailed in the shallow channel, and the anchor line, rated for 400 pounds, parted with a sound like a gunshot. He didn't look back. He drove that boat through a stand of button willow that scratched parallel lines down both arms like a map of something. And he didn't stop until he hit the main channel and could see the faint ghost of a cell tower above the tree line. He made it back to the launch at 12:30. His wife was waiting at the dock. "Told you it wouldn't be noon," she said. He never went back to that spot. He sold the anchor line, what was left of it, at a garage sale and didn't explain the frayed end to the man who bought it. The thing that bothers him most, he told me over coffee at a diner in Krotz Springs, isn't the knocking, it's the count. The first set was 3 wraps, the second was 7. He's thought about it for 2 years and he cannot shake the feeling that something beneath that water wasn't startled, wasn't hunting, it was counting. Whatever was under the hull of Marcus Thibodeau's boat on that October morning knew how to count, and it was getting higher. He says he still goes fishing, just never alone, just never there. There is a stretch of Bayou Teche, south of Jeanneret, where the water runs so still and black that on a calm day it becomes a perfect mirror. You can see the cypress trees doubled, the sky inverted, your own face looking up at you from 6 inches below the surface. The old Creole families who settled this land in the 1840s warned their children to never stare too long into still water at dusk. They said that something lived in the reflection, not in the water, but in the reflection itself, that the dark mirror showed things that weren't exactly there or things that were there but hadn't arrived yet. Whether you believe that or not, hold it in mind. Celestine Fontenot was 72 years old, and she had lived alone in her shotgun house on the Teche for going on 40 years, since her husband Edouard passed from a heart attack while pulling a pirogue out of the mud. She wasn't a fearful woman. She grew her own okra, kept 3 cats, made the best boudin in St. Mary Parish, according to anyone with a functioning tongue, and she slept with the windows open until November because she had earned the right. The night of August 15th, she was sitting on her screened porch after supper, watching the last of the daylight die on the bayou. The water was glass. Her 3 cats, Noel, Bastien, and Mirabelle, were arranged across the porch railing in their customary slouch. It was a good evening, right up until it wasn't. The first thing she noticed was Bastien. The old orange tabby had been asleep on the railing for an hour, and suddenly he was standing rigid, tail low, staring at the far bank of the bayou. Noel and Mirabelle followed 2 seconds later, all 3 cats locked on the same point across the water. Celestine looked. She saw nothing on the opposite bank, just the dark tree line, the trailing Spanish moss, the reflection of it all below. Then she looked more carefully at the water. On her side of the bayou, she could see the reflection of her own porch, her own roofline, her own window light doubling on the surface. She could see the shape of herself in the porch chair, small and dark, reflected in the still water below. But on the far bank, there was a figure standing at the water's edge. And in the water's reflection, where the figure's reflection should have been, there was nothing. Just the smooth black surface, unbroken, as if the figure across the bayou cast no shadow and held no mirror image. Celestine was not a woman given to panic, but she stood up and stepped back from the screen. The figure on the far bank hadn't moved. It was standing at the water's edge, approximately 5 feet tall, the posture upright and patient. She couldn't make out a face in the failing light. She couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, or something that had simply decided to wear the general shape of one. What she could tell was this: it was watching her. She went inside and got her late husband's shotgun from the closet. When she came back to the porch, the figure was gone. The far bank was empty tree line and hanging moss. Her 3 cats were gone from the railing. She found all of them under the bed, which they had never once done in 40 years of porch life. At 2 in the morning, something tried the door. Not the front door, the side door that opened off the kitchen, the one that led to the narrow alley between the house and the old woodshed. She heard the handle turn slowly, all the way to its stop, then release. Then silence. Then the turn again. Patient. Methodical. Celestine, sitting at her kitchen table with the shotgun across her knees and every light in the house burning, said, "I know you're there. I have a 12 gauge and I have been handling one since 1968. The handle stopped turning. She heard from the other side of the door a sound she described as breathing, low and irregular, with a long gap between each breath, as if whatever made it didn't need air the way she needed air. Just took a small amount. Just enough. Then she heard footsteps on the wooden side steps moving away, and the creak of the old woodshed door opening. She didn't leave the kitchen until full daylight. When she finally checked the side door, the handle was covered in a thin grey film, dry, with no smell. She scraped it off with a paint stick and burned the stick in the backyard. Celestine Fontenot is not given to exaggeration. She is sharp, practical, and deeply uninterested in drama. She told me the story in the same flat, factual tone she used to explain how to make a proper roux. She still lives in the same house. She still sleeps with the windows open until November. But she has hung a mirror on the inside of every window that faces the bayou. If it has no reflection, she told me, standing in her kitchen with a cup of coffee in her hand, it can't abide to look at one. She said her grandmother told her that. She's glad she remembered. The woodshed, she hasn't opened it since August. She says she can hear something inside it, sometimes. Not moving, just breathing, just taking that small amount of air, just enough. There are places in the Atchafalaya swamp that don't appear on any map, not because the cartographers missed them, but because the land itself doesn't hold still long enough to be properly recorded. The river shifts, sandbars appear and vanish in a single season, islands of floating marsh drift for miles before anchoring somewhere new. You can spend 20 years paddling these waters and still find a channel you've never seen, a grove of cypress that stands where open water stood last spring, a clearing deep in the interior where the light hits at a wrong angle and the air tastes like iron and old fire. In September of last year, 2 kayakers found one of those places. They were the second people to find it. They were the first ones to leave. Derek Mouton and his college roommate Paul Segura had been paddling multi-day bayou trips since their early 20s. They were methodical, well-equipped, experienced. Between them, they carried a dry bag of emergency gear that most outdoor stores would have been proud to sell as a display kit. They put in at the Butte La Rose boat launch at 7 in the morning, with 4 days of food, 2 single kayaks, a Garmin InReach communicator, and the well-founded confidence of men who had done this dozens of times. The plan was simple: paddle south into the interior, camp 2 nights, circle back along the western channel. Derek's log from the first day reads, "Perfect conditions, water clear, saw a roseate spoonbill. Good start." On the afternoon of day 2, working through a narrow channel they hadn't paddled before, they came around a bend and found the campsite. It was set in a clearing on a levee of high ground, rare enough in the Atchafalaya to be immediately notable. Someone had been there. The fire ring was properly constructed, full of grey ash. A single aluminum camp chair sat open beside it. A blue tarp had been stretched between 2 cypress trees, the far corners pulled loose and sagging, pooling rainwater. Tied to a root at the water's edge was an empty rope, the kind used to tether a kayak. Cut end. Derek said the hair on his arms went up. Paul said he thought someone had to leave in a hurry. They called out. No answer, but the heron that launched from the far tree line. They beached and walked the clearing. The camp chair held a single boot, just one, size 10, the laces neatly tied. In the ashes of the fire ring, Paul found what he initially thought was a stick. It was a finger, a human ring finger, the bottom 2 joints dried and blackened, but unmistakable to a man with medical training. Paul confirmed it was old, weeks at least. They decided to make camp elsewhere and push back the following morning. They were loading the kayaks when Derek noticed the ash ring again. There were footprints in the grey ash, not from their approach, which had been from the south side. These came from the water side, small, narrow prints, coming out of the ash and walking to the camp chair, then stopping. No prints walking away. They paddled until dark and made camp 2 miles back toward the launch. They ate cold food and kept the fire very small. At midnight, Derek's Garmin pinged, an alert he'd set to notify him if the device detected movement near a previous waypoint. He had marked the abandoned campsite on arrival. The device was registering movement at that waypoint, consistent, slow movement, in circles. Paul said it was a GPS glitch. Derek turned on his headlamp and looked at the channel behind them. He saw nothing. He turned the headlamp off. In the darkness, he saw, barely, peripherally, a phosphorescent smear in the water, low and slow and moving upstream toward their camp. They did not discuss it. They broke camp in the dark, loaded the kayaks by feel, and paddled blind for 40 minutes, using only Derek's compass app. At one point, Paul's paddle struck something just below the surface. Solid, large, not a log. And it moved away fast. They both heard it. They said nothing. They kept paddling. They reached the launch at 3 in the morning, loaded the cars in the dark, and drove to Lafayette, where they sat in a Waffle House under fluorescent lights for 2 hours before speaking about any of it. They reported the campsite to the Iberia Parish Sheriff's Office. Deputies checked the location 2 days later. They found the fire ring, the tarp, the rope, no chair, no boot, no ashes. The ring was there, but the ashes had been cleared, every fleck of grey, every piece of charred wood, while leaving the stones perfectly in place. As if someone wanted to remove the evidence, but didn't understand that the stones themselves were evidence. Or didn't care. Derek still has the Garmin. He has not deleted the waypoint. He told me he checks the motion history sometimes late at night, when he can't sleep. The device logged movement at that campsite for 4 consecutive nights after they left. Then it stopped. You need to understand the sound design of a bayou at 3 in the morning before you can understand why this story is what it is. There is no silence out here. The swamp is never quiet, but the sounds are deeply predictable. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something large shifting in the shallows, owls calling across distance, wind through long Spanish moss which makes a sound like tissue paper being unfolded very slowly. These are the tracks underneath everything else, and once you know them, your brain files them as background and moves on. What your brain cannot file as background, what it will lurch upright and attend to with every available nerve, is the sound of a child's voice singing in the dark, in a place where there are no children, half a mile from the nearest road, in a part of the marsh where no one has any business being at all. Wildlife biologist Renata Chenier was conducting a night survey for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, specifically documenting American alligator activity in a remote section of the Milepost Swamp wildlife management area. She did this work alone and regularly had done it for 6 field seasons, and regarded the dark interior of the swamp with professional familiarity and zero sentimentality. She wore chest waders, carried a 3 million candle power spotlight, a handheld radio, and pepper spray. By 2:15 in the morning, she'd logged 9 gator pairs and was making good time through the shallow water when she stopped to mark a waypoint on her GPS. That's when she heard the voice. It was a girl's voice, she thought. Young, maybe 6 or 7 years old based on pitch and timbre. Singing something she couldn't identify, not a nursery rhyme she recognized, a melody that had a simple repeating structure but in a minor key that didn't resolve, just looped back to the beginning. Coming from the northeast, she estimated, across roughly 200 meters of open marsh. No one lived northeast of her position for miles. She stood absolutely still in the water and listened. The frogs went on, the insects went on, the singing went on. It sounded completely unconcerned. Happy, almost. The way a child would sing in a backyard, not in a swamp, in the dark, alone. She radioed base camp. No answer. She did what her professional judgment said to do, which was keep working her grid. She did not move toward the voice. She documented it in her field notes with time and compass bearing. For 40 minutes, the singing continued. Then it stopped. Then, 15 minutes later, it started again. But it was closer, not by a little. The voice that had been 200 meters northeast was now 50 meters directly behind her. She hadn't heard movement through the water, hadn't heard the marsh grasses disturbing. She had heard nothing but the background, and then the voice was simply closer in the way a radio signal gets clearer when you move toward its source. Except Renata hadn't moved. She turned with the spotlight. The marsh behind her was flat and open and lit in a column of white light for 100 meters. She saw nothing. She held the light there for a full 30 seconds, sweeping slowly. Then the singing started again, this time to her left, within 20 meters, within comfortable speaking distance. She wheeled the spotlight left, and her boot caught a submerged root, and she went down hard, shoulder deep. The spotlight dunked and gone, and she was in complete darkness in 20 inches of swamp water with a child's voice singing 7 feet away from her face. She got up. She found the spotlight, still worked, sealed unit, and she lit it, and she swept it in a full 360, and she was alone. She walked back to her truck in a direct line, abandoning her grid, not running, making herself not run, and she drove to the WMA check station and sat in her locked truck for 2 hours with the engine running and every light on. The department attributed the incident to sound traveling unpredictably over water. Renata, who holds a master's degree in ecology and has 6 years of field experience, wrote "received" in the response box and said nothing further to her supervisors. She told me, however, that she had gone back, not to work, on her own time, in daylight, to look at the sector. She found, at the northeast edge of her grid marker, a clear path through the marsh grass. Not a game trail. This was walked deliberately and regularly. She followed it for 80 meters before it ended at a small hummock of dry ground, barely 3 feet across. On the hummock, there were small depressions in the soft earth. Barefoot. The size of a child's foot, going out, none coming back. People buy houseboats on the Louisiana Bayou for the same reasons they move to the end of any road. They want to be left alone by the modern world. The bayou asks nothing from you. It just sits there, warm and old and enormous, and it will absolutely take you if you offer yourself carelessly, but otherwise it will let you watch the herons and let your phone battery die without comment. This is the story of what happened to one of those people when the bayou decided it wanted something back. Owen Graff was a 45-year-old freelance translator who had purchased a 40-foot houseboat moored in a private slip off Bayou Black outside Houma. He worked remotely, required nothing from his neighbors, and had been living aboard for 3 years with the comfortable rhythms of someone who had deliberately chosen a quiet life. He ran a generator from 8 to noon for electricity, kept a John boat for shore trips, and knew all 3 of his nearest neighbors by first name, though he rarely saw them. It was October, the best month, he said, the month the heat finally relents. And he was sitting on his rear deck at 9 in the evening translating a legal document when he heard someone board the forward deck. His houseboat had a distinct vocabulary of sounds, the way any vessel does. He knew every creak, every groan, every vibration of the hull against the slip cushions. The sound of a person stepping from the dock onto the forward deck was absolutely distinctive, and that was absolutely what he heard. 2 steps, then a pause. He set down his laptop and called out. No answer. He walked through the interior to the forward door and opened it. But the forward deck was empty. The dock was empty. He went back to his work. He told himself it was the dock settling, which he knew was not a thing that happened, but which sounded reasonable enough to function as an explanation for approximately 20 minutes. At 10:15 he heard footsteps on the roof. Clear, deliberate, slow footsteps traversing the length of the vessel from bow to stern. He went outside and looked up at the roof deck. Empty. The access ladder was pulled and locked from below, as he always kept it. In the morning, he found the impression. In the thin condensation on the roof deck, a series of prints running bow to stern, and then, at the stern end, stopping. Narrow, elongated, with a central pad and 4 forward points that could have been toes or could have been something else. Each print roughly 18 inches long. He photographed them before the morning sun burned them off. The third night, he saw it. He'd been sleeping lightly when he heard the forward deck again. The 2 steps, the pause. He moved to the bowside porthole rather than the door. Through the porthole, he could see a narrow band of the forward deck in the flashlight beam. There was a figure sitting on the deck rail. Sitting with the comfortable, settled posture of someone who had been there a long time and planned to remain. Its back was to him. It was tall. His rail was 30 inches, and its head was well above that when seated. The shape of it was wrong in ways he found difficult to specify. The shoulder line too level, the neck too long, the head slightly too large for the body, in the way a child's head is proportionally too large. Except this was not a child. It appeared to be looking at the water. Owen turned on every light on the vessel simultaneously. The deck floods, the interior lights, the anchor light, everything he had. The figure was gone when the lights came on. He saw it go, saw the rail empty as the floods lit. And in that first half-second of full illumination, he saw a disturbance in the water adjacent to the bow, a spreading concentric disruption, as of something that had entered the water very quickly. He called his brother in Houma. His brother came at midnight, and at 3 in the morning, the forward deck sounded again. Both men heard it. And when they turned, on the deck flood, the rail was empty. But the bow, cleat, heavy, galvanized steel, 30 pounds if it was an ounce, had been removed from the deck and placed gently on the bow railing, balanced, as if set there with care. The mounting bolts were intact. Nothing had been stripped or forced. The cleat had simply been lifted out and placed there. Owen sold the houseboat 8 months later and lives in an apartment in Lafayette now with very bright lights and no body of water in any direction for 3 blocks. He told me the thing that bothers him most is the placement of the cleat, the care of it, the deliberateness. It wasn't vandalism, it wasn't aggression, it was communication. Something wanted him to know it was capable and strong and patient. He checked the marine records afterward. A previous owner of the slip, 12 years before, had reported a similar incident. Sounds on the roof, figure at the bow. He had drowned in the slip 2 weeks later. Accident, the coroner said. The cleat is still on Owen's kitchen counter. He can't explain why he kept it. He can't bring himself to touch it either.